Tēnā koutou katoa and welcome to our webinar. I'm Amber Flynn, I'm the Program Manager for the PBRF. With me I have Sharon Beattie, one of our Senior Advisors, and Emma Smart, one of our Panel Advisors, here to help out with any questions. We also have Morgan Healy, who has arranged most of the training that we have had. I'll be talking you through some of the more operational topics covered at the face-to-face training. This will help you catch up on what was covered there. If you've already reviewed the full set of slides from that training, some of this will look familiar. However, we have updated it to reflect where we're at now in the process. So in terms of the format, your microphones are muted. This is in order to help the webinar run more smoothly, but you can still submit some questions. You can do this by clicking on the question mark icon on the control panel. We've built in some specific slots for questions, however, there are some that might be better answered offline. But please be assured that we will respond to all questions that are asked. The webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the panelist information site, so if there are any technical difficulties, you still have access to it. We have a wide range of PBRF experience here, so please bear with us if you feel that the presentation is not pitched exactly at your level of knowledge or experience. And remember, we are happy to help offline through email or phone. Sorry about that. The purpose of the training is set out in the slides in front of you. So the integrity of the quality evaluation process is vital. It is important that you understand and feel confident in your role, the TEC's role, and the stages of assessment. The training has been designed to spotlight key parts of the process, which are particularly important for all panelists to understand, and also to provide an opportunity to focus on understanding the assessment and calibration processes in greater detail. In particular, applying consistent judgment against the scoring descriptors. So in this webinar, we're going to touch on individual assessment and panel assessment. We know that the quality evaluation is relatively complex, but the guidelines for the assessment process are your operating manual. The guidelines were developed in consultation with the sector over the course of 2 years and set out this process that you, as a member of a panel and the TEC, are required to follow. Now, this is essential as your judgment and your decisions aren't cause for a legal challenge, but both your and our adherence to the process is. So some of you may recognise this picture. So you would have seen in the online training our diagram called Journey of an EP. This outlines the stages of the quality evaluation process from creation through to the awarding of a quality category at the panel meeting. So now we've gone through the assignment stages of this journey, and your chairs have assigned the evidence portfolios submitted to your panels. So this includes assigning EPs to you as part of a panel pair, either as a lead or a second panelist. The chairs have also been requesting EPs to be cross-referred to other panels. And one of the other roles that a chair has is the approving or declining these requests for cross-referral assessment from another panel. If it's approved, you might be assigned as a cross-referral assessor. So the assessment process started on the 27th of August and goes through until the 2nd of November. So is there anything else that you need to do? Well, we've asked all panelists to first check if you have any conflicts of interest with your assigned EPs. So if you do, it's essential that you record it in the IT system, but that you also contact your chair directly. This is because the chair may need to reassign that EP, and as we've moved on quite far into the assessment process, we recommend that you do that as soon as possible. You do need to review your EPs in the assignment workload report and check if you need to either request any physical NROs or if you need to download any large NRO files. We also need you to talk to your chair if you think a cross-referral might be required. So you are likely to be assigned EPs that are outside your area of specialisation, usually as a second in these cases. This would not be cause for a cross-referral, as we do expect you to use your expertise as an assessor. However, if you do think that a cross-referral is required, then talk to your panel peer before discussing this with the chair. And then also refer to the relevant panel-specific guidelines, as these do provide a little bit more information on what other panels are expected to cover. And then if you have a specific time period that you'll be available and assessing your EPs, it's good to let your other panel peer know, or your various panel peers, I should say, know, and that ensures that there are no unnecessary delays in the process. So if you haven't done these 4 tasks, it's not too late, but please try and get onto these as soon as possible. So we had a little slide here in terms of if any questions popped up prior to that. We have got a couple of these little slide sessions in here for questions. So if you just want to pop a question through the webinar format, then we can get to those. Otherwise, if there are no questions come through, we'll just move on. So this slide here is on the principles of assessment. So there are 5 key principles of assessment that we'll cover here. The first is that the quality evaluation is a standards referenced rather than a norm-referenced assessment process. There are no predetermined limits on the proportion of EPs that can be assigned to particular quality categories. The second is that these standards are based on the 0 to 7 scoring system, and more specifically the descriptors for each of these 2 components of the EP, the research output or RO component and the research contribution or RC component. So we would expect to see scores of 7 allocated to EPs, and some chairs have noticed a certain reluctance of some panellists to do this in previous rounds. So at panel training, the concept of a mythical 8 was raised by some chairs who have used this concept to sort of encourage their panellists to score at the higher levels. The third principle relates to the tie point descriptors. So these set out the standards expected for the scores of 2, 4 and 6 for the RO component and the RC component. One of the questions that has been raised is when to score above or below the tie points. The previous advice is to look at the proportion of content. So for example, 1 stellar research output out of 16 wouldn't usually be considered enough to award a score of 7. However, if the majority of the component exceeded the tie point for 6, then it would be justified. The consensus at the panel training meetings was to work your way down the scoring scale rather than sort of start at the lower tie point. The fourth principle is that only information contained in the EP can be used for assessment purposes. So do not take external information into account. For example, what you might know is your professional role. We understand that you can't unknow information about potentially a researcher, an output, or journal rankings, but being aware of that and being aware of how that might influence your judgment is the key here. So you cannot seek any additional information to inform your judgments. So this also applies to non-contextualized information in an EP. So an example of this would be where a small snippet of a review has been submitted, or where bibliometrics have been included, but without any wider contextual information. So one of the other things that came up at the panel training was if you're unsure of the significance of what has been put in an EP. So this could be the relative status of a dissemination channel, for example, the journal or the conference or the venue. Our advice is don't Google it to check if you're bringing, as you're bringing in outside information that may not be correct. It might potentially bias you either positively or negatively, but also it may be a distraction from what you're actually here to assess, which is the quality of the actual research, not the quality of the dissemination channel. Our advice is that base your score on what you see in front of you. Then talk to your other assessor. They might have more knowledge that they can bring into the preliminary scoring discussion. And if you're both unsure of the significance and believe that it may have an impact on your scoring, Then bring it to the panel for discussion at the calibrated panel scoring stage and use the collective knowledge of the panel. Finally, if there is something in an EP that you think is incorrect regarding the validity of an output or an item, you can submit an audit concern. Now, we encourage you to review the audit concern poster and the recently released FAQs that are on the panelist information site, as these provide more information on what is and isn't a valid audit concern, and also how to submit one. The final point is about the quality categories. What do A, B, C, and E, R, and R and E mean? Again, these are standards that you apply when you consider the EP holistically. Each quality category has a specific descriptor, and these denote a standard rather than a location of research activity. Part of the work done by the sector reference group was to shift perceptions about the different quality categories. And part of this has been the redefining of what does world-class mean. So, world-class is a standard, not a type or focus of research. And I'm going to quote from the guidelines here. We've stressed that world-class research outputs are those outputs that rank with the best within their broader discipline, regardless of the topic, theme, or location of the research or place of publication. Research outputs that deal with topics or themes of primarily local, regional, or national focus or interest can be a world-class standard. For example, research that focuses on Māori or Pacific topics or themes, New Zealand history, or New Zealand culture, economy, well-being, or ecology may rank with the best research of its discipline conducted anywhere in the world. In terms of research contributions, these might reflect the esteem of peers considered to be global experts in their field, or show how the staff member contributes to a world-leading research environment. So now we have what I have trademarked as the RO scoring triangle. So the score given to the research output, or RO component, is awarded to the entire body of research that is presented in this component. Now, primarily you'll base your judgment on the NROs. This includes the examination of the actual research output submitted, as well as the information provided about them in the EP. This will be the primary indicator of the quality of research. The ROs should provide you with an indication of the wider platform of research undertaken, bearing in mind that there is a maximum of 12 to be included. The ROs should reflect the quality that is evidenced in the NROs. Now, the information in the platform of research contextual summary may provide a potentially broader scope of work than what has been included in the EP. However, this should only be considered as contextual information rather than specific evidence of quality. The guidelines note that the research output scores are likely to be higher where the overall platform of research in an EP shows evidence of a greater breadth or depth of research activity. So no one specific output type is weighted higher than another. So it's important that you consider all types of research on their merit. And here we have the research contribution scoring rectangle. The underpinning principle here is the research contribution component should reflect the broad range of activities and outcomes undertaken and/or achieved by a researcher relative to opportunity and be appropriate for an individual's research discipline. So the research contribution component provides an opportunity for the researcher to demonstrate the esteem in which their peers within and outside of TEOs hold their research, their role and the contributions they make in creating a vital, high-quality research environment, and also any impact that their research has had outside of academia. Research contribution items will be indicators of a vital, high-quality research environment and may also provide indicators of the social, cultural, environmental, and economic benefits of the research. So this can include the advancement of Mātauranga Māori. These items may be local, national, or international in orientation and impact. So as with the RO component, the score given to the research contribution component reflects all of the items submitted. So the guidelines do advise, however, that to obtain a high score, strong and consistent evidence of both peer esteem and contributions to the research environment would normally be expected. Strong and consistent examples of community or end user impact will also contribute to a high score, although it's not expected that all staff members will either have or will have included such examples. And again, it's really important that you consider all research contribution types on their merit. So the items that are submitted in this component will differ across the 12 research contribution types. So we do expect TEOs to have provided a comprehensive description of the nature and significance of each item. Now this should, theoretically, include sufficient information for you to assess the quality and prestige to support your assessment, and there should be evidence of this. There are two new research output types, research contribution types in this round. These are uptake and impact, and outreach and engagement. So unlike other research assessment exercises, there is no increased weighting on these two types, and they are not mandatory types either. So we still have no questions, so I'm hoping that everyone...
Oh, Robert has his hand up.
Oh, Robert, you have your hand up. Okay. Robert, if you could just send us a message through, we can respond to you. Okay, so we have a question about the uptake and engagement quality categories. So the uptake and impact and outreach and engagement research contribution types are new for this quality evaluation. We've previously not had anything in the quality evaluation process which has looked at impact or end user engagement. So these are new for this round, but as I said, they are not mandatory types, so EPs may or may not include these, and there is no increased weighting for these types. So I know that some international exercises do have impact as a separate part of their assessment, and that these are weighted differently. However, in our this 2018 quality evaluation, we're taking more of an impact light approach, which is trying to introduce these concepts to the process.
Okay, and there's a question here from Robert has said, with the RCs, do we adjust for the level of employment? That is, would you apply a higher standard for a professor and a lower standard for an early career academic?
Yeah. So the quality evaluation does apply a slightly different standard for early career academics. So, and this is what we refer to as our new and emerging category. So in those cases, those researchers don't need to, or can have limited or no evidence of research contribution, but still be awarded a C, new and emerging quality category. So they do need to have a minimum score of 2 on their research outputs, but they can have a 0 or a 1 and still get a funded quality category. All researchers, regardless of their career stage, do need to meet the quality standards for a or a B. So there's no distinguishing between the A and B quality categories.
Okay, Emma, another question. Andrew's asked, some RCs might list multiple activities, for example, 30 invited seminars, while others might be singular, gave a distinguished lecture on X. How would we compare those?
So in those cases, you just need to look at the information that's presented in front of you and determine what the quality of those are. And then as you start to go through the process, you'll actually start to sort of gauge what we've tended to refer to as the quantity of quality, and then use your judgment and talk to your panel peer if you've got any concerns about how you're applying that.
And I think you probably answered this one just now then. Martinez asked, how do we score RCs that list only or mostly conference invitations?
Yeah, so in that case, you'd need to look at the quality category descriptors and really determine the nature and the significance of those conference invitations.
The one from Alison Sheridan.
Sorry?
Alison Sheridan.
Yes. Okay. So, and Alison's said that she's noticed some statements re contribution that refer to activity prior to the period. So, do we ignore? And she's asking, do we ignore these and stay focused on the period?
Yeah. So the research activities need to have occurred within the assessment period. So the only issue that the only difference here is if something started in the previous period but has continued on. So we've used this specific example of fellowships or equivalent as the only thing that is an exception to the assessment period. So if you have identified things where they have there's an activity or a STEAM that was received in 2007 or in earlier, I do believe I saw some that were 1998 in the last quality evaluation round. That is an audit concern, so you should submit an audit concern in relation to those.
Do you want to talk about that? Yeah.
That was mainly on the conference question around.
So just coming back to the
expectations for 6
conference
and 7.
question.
So going back to Martine's question around the conference contributions, again, for those higher scores, a 6 or a 7, the guidelines do state that it is expected that you have both peer esteem and contributions to the research environment. So if someone's research contribution section is solely filled with contributions only or esteem only, it's not likely that you would award a 6 or a 7 in those cases.
And another question from Robert. Robert asks, I've got one university where 3 researchers have a really great portfolio. The trouble is it's pretty much the same portfolio. There's considerable overlap. Do we do anything about this?
In this case, no, you don't. So we are assessing individuals as the unit of assessment, but one of the things that we really want the PBRF to do is to encourage collaboration, and so this is perfectly acceptable within the framework of the PBRF.
And another question from Martine, are sole-authored books considered a major research output?
This actually came up at panel training as well, and so I think, bearing back to my memory of that, the answer was yes, because if someone is actually creating a book, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and that could be the equivalent of multiple pieces of research, if it had been split up. So I think the response at the panel training was that yes, this would be considered a major research output.
That seems to be all the questions for now. We'll have another space soon, won't we, Amber?
We will.
Oh, no. Sorry, Robert. So Robert's asking, what do we do with foreign language NROs? My German is rather poor.
Yeah. If you do come across any of these, contact your panel advisor. We do have a process for trying to work out how to deal with this, but we are taking a case-by-case basis. So talk to your panel advisor. Okay, I will move on, but we do have another slot, so do feel free to keep typing questions through as we go. Okay, so the next section is about preparing for the panel assessment. So specifically, we're going to have an overview of the panel meeting and its components, the purpose and importance of each component, and what you as a panelist need to do in each of these components. So as we said, the individual assessment ends on the 2nd of November. Between then and when your panel meeting starts, you should prepare for the meeting by, first, reviewing the EPs that you've assessed, and second, make sure you have notes for each EP and are prepared to speak to these. This was something that came up, quite consistently across all 4 face-to-face training meetings, was the importance of your notes and being able to understand why you made the decision on a score that you made and what was the evidence that you used to determine that. So after the 2nd of November, you will be able to view all of the EPs submitted to your panel. So you should confirm that you have declared any conflicts of interest that could prevent you from participating in the panel discussion, and also ensure that you maintain the confidentiality of the materials. So what happens at these meetings? So panels will first calibrate themselves as a group, work through all the EPs to determine a calibrated panel component scores and quality categories, undertake a detailed holistic assessment for EPs that have been flagged for this, including all of those that have extraordinary circumstances, declare and action conflicts of interest, and manage the assessment of panelists' own EPs. Now, let's look at each of the components for the panel assessment process. So at the panel meetings, you'll go through the following steps. Step 1 is panels calibrate to ensure consistency in applying the scoring system. They do this by referring back to the tie point descriptors and the quality category descriptors. Step 2 is panels review all of the EPs. So this is led by the chair. Step 3 is the holistic assessment stage. And step 4 is when panelists' own EPs are calibrated and assessed. So let's take some time to review these steps in more detail. Step 1 is the calibration stage. All panelists should understand and be able to apply the tie point descriptors to ensure that there is consistency across the panel. So what is calibration? A useful definition of calibration is a process to ensure all panelists have a clear and agreed understanding of the scoring system, increasing the reliability of the assessment process. To ensure the credibility of the quality evaluation, it is important to understand the tie point descriptors and be comfortable applying these in the individual, peer, and panel assessment. So why is calibration so important? Well, it improves marker consistency and interscorer reliability. It ensures that scores are based on the descriptors, and it ensures the assessment is seen as robust, fair, and objective. So how does the calibration process work? Well, first, the panels will discuss pre-selected EPs for the calibration exercise. So these will have been selected by your chair and the deputy chair as exemplars that are solidly within the quality categories. This exercise will help achieve consistency. The panel will then review how the tie point and quality category descriptors were applied and determine consistency. Once this consistency is achieved, the panels will then work through the EPs on the quality category boundaries. The goal is to assess and make any changes based on calibrated understanding of those tie point descriptors. And it is really important to discuss the differences of opinion objectively and respectfully. Step 2 sets out the framework for reviewing EPs. So once calibrated, the whole panel will review all of the EPs assigned and assessed by that panel. So led by the chair, panelists will discuss and calibrate the various component scores against the tie point descriptors, specifically those along the quality category boundaries. The order of review will be consistent across all the panels, beginning with the clear A's and moving down through the scores to the RC boundary as per set out in the slide. So the EPs that will get the most attention at this stage will include those identified by panelists for wider discussion within the panel, those that are within 70 points either above or below the quality category boundaries, and all EPs where the panel peer have declined to enter a preliminary score. So this would be where they've been unable to reach an agreement on those preliminary scores. The calibrated panel component scores are then entered into the IT system, and they may be higher or lower than what the preliminary scores given originally. So step 3 is the holistic assessment stage. So what is this? Well, the purpose of the holistic assessment is to determine the most appropriate quality category for an EP. So the panel will consider all relevant factors and information to ensure a fair and accurate quality category is given. So at this stage, panels look at the big picture of an EP, which may change the calibrated panel quality category that was given previously. All EPs automatically receive a holistic quality category based on the calibrated panel quality category, but only a minority of EPs actually get considered for a detailed holistic assessment by the panel. So how do these EPs get selected for holistic assessment? Well, they should be meeting these criteria. So the researcher has claimed extraordinary circumstances, which we'll cover in detail shortly. So in this round, there are 377 EPs with extraordinary circumstances. This is approximately 4.5% of all EPs submitted. So this is a significant reduction from the previous round when it was about 30% of EPs. 2006, I believe it was about 60% of EPs, and in the very first round in 2003, there was about 80% of EPs that were all very special. So another example of meeting the criteria is where the panel, either the panel members or potentially at the panel meeting, they've identified uncommon quality or quantity issues with the scoring of the EP. So this often occurs when raw component scores don't accurately represent the overall quality of the EP. So, for example, where the researcher works primarily in an area where research outputs are confidential and a lot of their work cannot be made publicly available, so therefore it isn't eligible. And another criteria is where there is a marked difference between the RO and the RC scores, producing sort of jagged scoring profile, really. So, for example, a low RO score, but a very high RC score. So, considerations during the holistic assessment. As a panel, what you'll do is you'll consider the following when you're making a decision about changing a quality category. So the first is the quality category descriptors and the quality category that is determined at each stage of the assessment. So are these consistent when you're looking at all of the information that's presented in an EP? You'd also be considering the scores of the RO and RC components that have been given at each stage of the assessment process. You'll look at the information in the platform of research contextual summary and also potentially what the recorded FTE is. This may indicate that part-time employment may be a factor. You'll look at whether the extraordinary circumstances are eligible for consideration and are they sufficient to actually affect the quality category that is assigned to the EP. And whether the evidence in the RC component is consistent with the judgments made about the appropriate score for the RO. So example here, where you've got the high RC but a low RO score. So this means that panels do need to take into consideration the component weightings that are given. So this type of scoring profile, so a high RC but a low RO, is perfectly acceptable. However, the RC component is only weighted at 30% of the total score, and as a result, this can place an EP into a lower quality category than the panel thinks is actually appropriate for the whole portfolio. So the fourth and final step of panel assessment is the assessment of panelists' own EPs. So how will this work? So the assessment of panelists' EPs will be done last after the holistic assessment. When a panelist's own EP is being assessed by the panelist will need to leave the room. Other panelists from the same institution may also be required to leave the room. This is depending on conflicts of interest. In this case, the chair will be responsible for determining an appropriate quorum. He or she will need to discuss and receive the principal moderator's approval for this before the start of the meeting. A member of the moderation panel, the TEC's moderation panel advisor, or the TEC's internal auditor will also be present when the EP of a panelist is being assessed. An important change from the 2012 quality evaluation is that panellists won't find out their own result at the panel meeting. So please be aware of the increased need for confidentiality amongst panel members. Okay, so we have another slide here for questions.
There's a question from Martine. Can we print out our forms for each EP on location? I think you mean at the panel meetings, Martine.
There won't be any facility for printing out EP scoring information or anything like that. So we'll be advising all panellists prior to attending panel meetings of a sort of checklist of things that they need to bring. One of those will be any of your notes and whatever form is required for you to be able to basically get running straight away. So any other questions? Will we need laptops? Okay, so we do recommend that people do bring their laptops. We don't have any laptops that can be provided. Okay, has anyone got any other questions? We do have a final question session at the end, so I'll move on from here. And as I said before, please just continue to type your questions through. So, extraordinary circumstances. In previous quality evaluation rounds, these were called special circumstances and covered a much broader range of scenarios. This has been reduced for the 2018 quality evaluation. So, what are extraordinary circumstances? So this is a provision to ensure that staff members who have experienced extraordinary circumstances are treated equitably in the assessment. So these are circumstances that have seriously affected the quantity of research and research-related activities during the assessment period. However, they do not affect the assessment criteria for the quality of research. So one of the discussion points at the panel training was that someone may have also experienced a reduction in the quantity of quality research outputs, and this is also considered. There are two main types of extraordinary circumstances. We have general and Canterbury, and staff members may claim one or both of these. The circumstances must have occurred over a minimum period of 3 years during the assessment period, but these do not have to be continuous. Part-time employment is not considered a circumstance on its own. However, if a staff member is affected by the legitimate extraordinary circumstances and they are also part-time, they can include the information about their employment status in their description. Alternatively, part-time status might be outlined in the Platform of Research Contextual Summary. So again, this information might be relevant at the holistic assessment stage. However, we do expect people to have reviewed that and considered it, as part of their assessment judgment. And again, this might be a case where you might bring the EP to that calibrated panel component scoring discussion to get the wider views of the panel. If a panel member thinks that the result of the scoring reflects an issue related to the quantity of research outputs or research-related activities, but extraordinary circumstances have not been claimed, then again, this should be discussed with your panel peer and ensure that the scores are appropriately calibrated against the tie point descriptors. And then, if you both agree, then it can be flagged for holistic assessment if it's necessary. So as extraordinary circumstances will be taken into consideration as part of the holistic assessment, there are specific criteria for this. So we don't want people to be taking the extraordinary circumstances into consideration when they are doing their component scoring. It only gets assessed at holistic. Now this is different from in previous rounds where it was taken into consideration twice, when you did your preparatory scores and then again at the holistic. So if you have been part of the process before, it's probably worth noting that. So where possible, try to manage any biases that might creep into your component scoring as a result of reading the circumstances. So we'll take a closer look at the two types. we have general extraordinary circumstances. So there are 3 types under general circumstances, extraordinary circumstances, and 1 or more of these can be claimed. So we have long-term illness and disability, extended personal leave, and significant family or community responsibilities. So a question that was raised at panel training was how parental leave applies here. Researchers who have taken leave due to parental leave and ongoing childcare responsibilities are able to claim both extended personal leave and significant family and community responsibilities. And this latter category can also relate to the care of other family members, for example, elderly parents. And then we have the Canterbury extraordinary circumstances. Now, these have extended from the ongoing effects of quakes since late 2010 and the more significant quake in early 2011. So we have provided the videos on the impacts of these quakes in Canterbury, and we encourage you to review these if you haven't already. There are 5 types of impact that can be claimed, and Emeritus Professor Ian Town, who is our Extraordinary Circumstances Special Advisor, has reviewed each of the claims that have been made. As a fellow Cantabrian, he has noted that the claims made accurately reflect the ongoing effects of these quakes. So, what comes next? Well, you would have been able to enter your preparatory scores from the 27th of August. So the next deadline is today. So the deadline for hard copy NRO requests is today. So if you need to request any hard copy NROs, you may want to log off after this webinar and go and do that now. The next deadline coming up is the 21st of September. So this is the deadline for requesting any additional cross referrals. So what we are encouraging is that if you think there is anything in an EP, talk to your chair before that 21st deadline. The 18th of October is the deadline for the completion of preparatory scores. So this is the last day. It's not a hard date within the IT system, but we do want people to try and get those preparatory scores in, and it gives you sufficient time to actually start your preliminary scoring discussions and make sure that you've actually got everything in there and done by the 2nd of November. So while the 18th, we talk about the 18th of October being the last day, if you have actually got your preparatory scores all in there, you can start having those preliminary scoring discussions with your panel peers, from now. Some people have actually even got their preliminary scores in already. And that 2nd of November deadline is for the completion of your preliminary scores. Now that is a hard deadline. The IT system will actually change over to a new phase on that after that date. So we've put a number of resources from the face-to-face training on the panelist information site. We do recommend that you go and have a look at those. Your chair either has or will be having a one-to-one discussion with you, and your panel advisor is here to support you if you have any other questions or issues. The training IT system is currently in the individual assessment phase, so that's there if you want to practice any of the system functionality in a training environment. All of the training modules will remain available for the duration of the quality evaluation for reference. So if you find that you can't remember quite how to do a function, you could always, look up one of the videos, put it on mute, because we know how much everyone loves the music. And all of the other material will be there for your use as well.
So there's one question from Martine. How do we access the EP details during the meetings?
So you'll have full access to all of the EPs that are assigned to your panel. So that includes yours. So we usually run the meeting by we'll be discussing one EP at a time. That EP gets brought up on the screen, but we do that's why we also recommend that people have their laptops so that they can potentially look through an EP, and they might want to look at NRO 1 if someone else is looking at NRO 4, for example.
Okay, and a question from Andrew. Do extended or additional administrative responsibilities ever qualify for extraordinary circumstances?
No, they don't. So that is not that's not a circumstance in this round. People may put that in their platform of research contextual summary, though. Okay, any other questions? Actually, I'll just extend on Martine's question around accessing the EP details during the meeting. One of the things that we will be providing is effectively a very long agenda of EP. So when each EP will be considered on which day. So that's information that you'll be provided each day and will help you to prepare and plan for when you're actually going to be leading on an EP discussion. Okay. So thank you very much for your participation in the webinar. We really appreciate your ongoing commitment to the PBRF. Now, if you need any other assistance, your panel advisor is here. You can contact them at pbrfpanels@tec.govt.nz. The whole PBRF team is here to support you through this process. And if you have any questions at all, just fire them through. Harera.
Stop recording.